Hey everyone, it is Adam and Akbar here with you. This lecture, we're going to do something a little bit different. I don't have a PowerPoint. I don't know, feel naked. It feels weird. So we're not doing the PowerPoint. I'm actually going to look at some notes and a little bit on the internet. And this is also different than our previous lectures because I'm focused just on a particular reading. In this case, Leon Kass's The Wisdom of Repugnance. And I'm going to post these lecture notes so that you'll have these. And of course, you can watch this video to help with you as you're reading along in this article, which I think is important and fascinating. I won't try to take too long on this. Of course, you can read it for yourself, and you should. But what I can do following along here is provide some context about cloning and Leon Kass, just briefly. But really what I want to do is emphasize the importance of descriptive ethics and moral reasoning. So here we are in our objectives for today. And along the way, we're going to get a sense of this conservative critique of modern science and modern ethics. I won't spend too much time on this, but Leon Kass is giving voice to a kind of deep criticism of modern natural science, insofar as it pictures the world, including us, as atoms in motion, atoms in the void, matter in motion. It tells us that our bodies maybe are these inert things, and we have a disembodied will that can do with our bodies what we want to do. And he thinks this scientific picture, in a way, is a descriptive ethics, and it's one that he wants to criticize. So that's why I like starting early in the semester with this piece, because it works on many layers to teach us just about ethics, but also it's about ethics and science as a case study in cloning. But more than that, it's ethics and science as a big thematic question about the relationship between modern natural science and our modern ethical vocabulary. Kass is a very deep critic of that. I put conservative in quotes because I know that word has a lot of connotations. What I mean with it is, again, this sort of profound and fundamental critique of modernity. Okay, maybe enough on that. What I want to do with Akbar's help is get into cloning. Of course, Akbar from Star Wars, we know all about cloning and the stormtroopers. So he's familiar with this technology. Let's see, I want to do a new share. Help me out, Akbar. So real briefly, this is something I studied. I was a biology major in college, and I remember studying this. So I just found an infographic. You can find good videos and everything out there, but if you're wondering what the heck is cloning all about, in a nutshell, this is somatic cell nuclear transfer cloning, which is what Kass has in mind. So you've got this is a pig, but it could work with any animal really. You have an adult female with an unfertilized egg here. What you do is you enucleate that egg, so you remove the nucleus from it. Then you take a skin cell, or any somatic cell, body cell, from another adult. And what you're doing is getting the nucleus from the skin cell into that enucleated egg. So now you have this creature's DNA inside of the egg. And as that egg develops into an embryo and then into a clone, and you're doing that inside of a surrogate mother, right? You get this cloned animal, which you see, I guess there's using the color here, is an exact genetic replicant of this animal that donated that skin cell. With a caveat that there's still, of course, the mitochondrial DNA from this within this enucleated egg, insofar as that matters to your thinking about this. Yeah, so that's a bit on cloning. I guess that's kind of what I wanted to say. Realizing not everybody's a biology major. Look, the upshot though is that you have genetically one parent, and the child is a genetic copy of that parent, and not a mixture of two parents. Dolly, made, right? This is what Kass is getting at, in 1997. And Scotland, at the Roslin Institute, University of Edinburgh. Not the first animal to be cloned. In fact, frogs had been cloned, I want to say, since the 70s. And Kass had actually already been critiquing some of those technologies. But the first mammal to be cloned, Dolly the sheep, and this made, I'm old enough to remember this making big news. Leon Kass, just a bit about him, pulling up the wiki page here. Prominent voice in bioethics circles. And the reason I got to know him really well, I did actually get to interview him once, is he was the chair of the President's Council on Bioethics, which formed under the administration of George W. Bush in 2001. And they wrote many reports here. I'm trying to think and remember now. What was it? There was something that happened. Oh, it was embryonic stem cells was one of their first reports on that, but they did write a report on cloning as well. How do I know all this stuff? Well, as this was my dissertation, it was on the Kass Council, as I called it, the President's Council on Bioethics. And I turned my dissertation into a book published in 2010. Shameless pitch there. Buy the book. Okay, no, don't. All right, let me get you a new share here. I know I can see my Word document, but you can't yet. So I'm hoping that you now see the Word document. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on this because you can run through these notes. So that's a bit of number 2, the context. Here's what I wanted to emphasize, though, is number 3 here. Descriptive ethics frames normative ethics. You see, Kass says the first task of ethics is proper description. And here is where our failure begins, he says. 2 examples, not from cloning. Think about whether you call it the estate tax or the death tax, if you follow this. But what do you do after somebody passes away with all of the money and property that they've accumulated over their life? Makes a big difference whether you frame this as the estate tax or the death tax. Or think about abortion politics, whether you frame it as pro-choice or pro-life. Everybody on both sides is probably pro-choice insofar as they like having choices in life, and everybody's also pro-life, right? But this way of framing it that then sets up everything that follows. Now, in Kass's argument, article, he gives us some examples at the beginning, and then he gets to cloning. But what we're talking about is, what is the thing under consideration? When you describe it, you have to frame it in a certain way. And all of the sort of ethical ramifications that fall out from that. So what are we talking about? He says with father-daughter incest, for example, even with consent, he says, is repulsive, repugnant. And we can't understand that if we think that it's just mixing genes. If we say, oh, well, the only risk there would be that if they produced a child, it might have genetic deformities. He says that's crazy. That's not why it's repulsive, right? So that description of father-daughter incest as an act of mixing genes, which might be a scientific description, right, is totally inaccurate and unhelpful and a poor way of describing the situation. So that's what he's doing with cloning now, right? And he says, look, in our modern moral vocabulary, which again he thinks is in some way derivative from the scientific worldview, we kind of have developed these 3 ways of framing cloning. 1, the technological. It's just a neutral tool, you know? You can use it for good uses, or you can use it for bad uses, like a clone army or something. But it in itself has no moral significance. And all that matters then is the motive, what you do with it. It's like a hammer. You can bash somebody's head with it, or you can build a homeless shelter, right? 2nd, the liberal. So it enhances choice. So it's actually a positive thing overall. So as long as people give their consent and as long as you minimize physical harm, you're good to go. And then there's the meliorist. That cloning is actually a means to enhance the gene pool. And so what matters at the end are the traits of the individuals that are cloned, right? If we make better people, that's a good thing. Okay, Um, Kass then has his own framing, which I want you to read with care. He says, no, there's more at stake than that. In fact, that misframes the cloning. What's at stake is meaningfulness, like existentially meaning in our lives, and also the meaning of being human, this anthropological, even ontological, metaphysical condition of being human, he says. We don't see that in these three frames above. Who are we then? And what is cloning? He says, well, we are begetting creatures who belong in families and other social relationships. We have a given nature as embodied, gendered, and engendering beings. If you begin with that description, you can see cloning within that frame as what he wants to say, a perversion of engendering or of procreation, as a crossing of a line and a blurring of categories that shouldn't happen, especially the category between procreation and manufacture. When you procreate and have a child the natural way, right? And he wants to use that word in a normative sense. You are not exerting your willfulness because you're not designing this child. It's really kind of a gift. You don't know what this person's going to be like. Who are they? But when you clone, you're taking a step towards manufacturing and design in willful creation of something. Productivity. That's not what we should be doing, is what he's saying. And until we describe it this way, we can't see why we're repulsed by it. So he's developing arguments to help us explain our revulsion. Although at the end of the day, he thinks the arguments don't have to do all the work for us. Okay, that's an interesting part. We're also belonging creatures. We have these social relations built on this natural embodied self, which is engendered through procreation. And this, he says, cloning would have all sorts of ramifications for our identity, our sense of self, and our kinship ties, mother and child, father and child, and then larger family relationships. So that's the main thrust of the article. At the end, he has some objections that he replies to. One, I mean, this was earlier on. He says, well, we've gotten used to things that used to cause revulsion. I'm thinking, for example, of miscegenation. So mixed race marriages used to be, of course, in this country, extremely controversial and caused many people to go, well, thank goodness we've gotten past that, or at least we're getting past that, right? So just because something's repulsive doesn't mean we should be repulsed by it. Yeah? But he also says, just because we've gotten used to something that used to be repulsive doesn't mean that that's a good thing. So I thought you might want to think about, are there things we've gotten used to that maybe we shouldn't have gotten used to? Okay. The second objection, we already accept artificial assist to reproduction, so we have this kind of reproductive freedom or this right to reproduction. And he goes on to say, well, what kind of right is this? Does this mean you can just go around, you have a right to have as many children as you want? Wouldn't you have also the obligation to care for those children? So what is this right and who has it? And is it a right? He says, I can understand a negative right as in freedom from state interference, but a positive right where I'm saying, regardless of any roadblocks nature throws in my way, I have a right to whatever technological mastery to overcome those roadblocks we can come up with. Those are different ways of framing procreative rights, reproductive rights. And then at the end he says, watch how we slide from health, which is restoring somebody, to, again, there's that word, normal functioning, into enhancement, which would be, well, why don't we juice somebody up above normal or typical levels of human intelligence or strength or something like that. So there's a slippery slope going on he's worried about. Okay, and in the end he says, look, ban human cloning. Let's outlaw it for reproductive purposes. And in their report that the Kass Council wrote later on, they said, well, some of them said it's okay to do cloning for research purposes, but not for reproductive purposes. I think Kass wasn't good with cloning either way, but certainly he wanted to ban cloning for reproduction. Okay, that's kind of what I wanted to do with you in this lecture. One of the things I'm doing, hopefully also, is modeling how to read articles, which can be tricky. I think outlining them this way, putting in your head what are the main points, is a good way to approach our material. Again, my philosophy of college, you're not just learning this stuff. I'm not sure you're going to remember exactly what Kass had to say after college. What you're doing is learning how to learn, right? We're trying to develop the skills to think our way through complex materials. And so I kind of want to model the way I do that in case you find that helpful. Okay, but that's enough for today. Until next time, may the force be with you.